Welcome back to the Book of Days project. Today's date, January 5th. Entries into the Book of Days by Chambers for this day. Born, Dr. Benjamin Rush, 1745, Philadelphia. Thomas Pringle, traveler and poet, 1789. Died, Edward the Confessor, 1066, Westminster. Catherine de Medicis, Queen of France, 1589. James Merrick, 1769, Reading. John Howe, author of The Scots Worthies, 1793. Isaac Reed, commentator on Shakespeare, 1807, and Marshall Radetzky, 1858. Today's the feast day of Saint Simeon Stylites, 459. Saint Telesphorus, 7th Bishop of Rome, 128. And Saint Syncretica, 4th century virgin. Saint Simeon Stylites, so named from the Greek word stylos, a pillar, was the founder of an order of monks, or rather solitary devotees, called pillar saints. Of all the forms of voluntary self-torture practiced by the early Christians, this was one of the most extraordinary. Originally a shepherd in Clicia about the year 408, when only 13 years of age, Simeon left his flocks and obtained admission into a monastery in Syria, but afterwards withdrew to a mountain about 30-40 miles east from Antioch, where he at first confined himself within a circle of stones. Deeming this mode of penance not sufficiently severe, in the year 423 he fixed his residence on the top of a pillar, which was at first 9 feet high, but was successfully raised to the somewhat incredible height of 60 feet, 40 cubits. The diameter of the top of the pillar was only 3 feet, but it was surrounded by a railing which secured him from falling off and afforded him some relief by leaning against it. His clothing consisted of the skins of beasts, and he wore an iron collar around his neck. He exhorted the assembled people twice a day and spent the rest of his time in assuming various postures of devotion. Sometimes he prayed kneeling, sometimes in an erect attitude with his arms stretched out in the form of a cross, but his most frequent exercise was that of bending his meager body so as to make his head nearly touch his feet. Spectator once observed him make more than 1,240 such reverential bendings without resting. In this manner he lived on his pillar more than 30 years, and there he died in the year 459. His remains were removed to Antioch with great solemnity. His predictions and the miracles ascribed to him are mentioned at large in Theodoratus, who gives an account of the lives of 30 celebrated hermits. The pillar saints were never numerous, and the propagation of the order was almost exclusively in the warm climates of the East. Among the names recorded is that of another Simeon, styled the Younger, who is said to have dwelt 60 years on his pillar. Today also took place the attempted assassination of Louis XV. On the 5th of January 1757, an attempt was made upon the life of the worthless French king Louis XV by Robert Francis Damiens. Between 5 and 6 in the evening, the king was getting into his coach at Versailles to go to the Trianon. A man who had lurked about the colonnades for 2 days pushed up to the coach, jostled the Dauphin, and stabbed the king under the right arm with a long knife. But the king having 2 thick coats, the blade did not penetrate deep. Louis was surprised, but thinking the man had only pushed against him, said, "Le coquin m'a donné un furieux coup de poing." But putting his hand to his side and feeling blood, he said, "Il m'y a blessé, qu'on le saisisse et qu'on ne lui fasse point de mal." The king being carried to bed, it was quickly ascertained that the wound was slight and not dangerous. Damiens, the criminal, appeared clearly to be mad. He had been footman to several persons, had fled for a robbery, had returned to Paris in a dark and restless state of mind, and by one of those wonderful contradictions of the human mind, a man aspired to renown that had descended to theft. Yet, in this dreadful complication of guilt and frenzy, there was room for compassion. The unfortunate wretch was sensible of the predominance of his black temperament, and the very morning of the assassination asked for a surgeon to let him blood. And to the last gasp of being, he persisted that he should not have committed this crime if he had been blooded. What the miserable man suffered is not to be described. When first raised and carried into the guard chamber, the garde d'escure and the Duc d'Ayen ordered the tongs to be heated and pieces torn from his legs to make him declare his accomplices. When carried to the dungeon, Damiens was wrapped up in mattresses, lest despair might tempt him to dash his brains out. But his madness was no longer precipitate. He even amused himself by indicating a variety of innocent persons as his accomplices, and sometimes more harmlessly by playing the fool with the judges. In no instance he sank either under terror or anguish. The very morning on which he was to endure the question, when told of it, he said with the coolest intrepidity, "La journée sera rude." After it, insisted on some wine with his water, saying, "Il faut assez de la force." And at the accomplishment of his tragedy, studied and prolonged on the precedent of Ravaillac, he supported all with unrelaxed firmness, and even unremitted torture of 4 hours, which succeeded to his being 2 hours and a half under the question, forced from him but some momentary yells. That, in France, so lately as 1757, such a criminal should have been publicly torn to pieces by horses, that many persons of rank should have been present on the occasion, and that the sufferer allowed quelques plaisanteries to escape him during the process, altogether leave us in a strange state of feeling regarding the affair of Damiens. And finally, today is 12th Day Eve. 12th Day Eve is a rustic festival in England. Persons engaged in rural employments or have heretofore been accustomed to celebrate it, and the purpose appears to be to secure a blessing for the fruits of the earth. In Herefordshire, at the approach of the evening, the farmers with their friends and servants meet together, and about 6 o'clock walk out to a field where wheat is growing. In the highest part of the ground, 12 small fires and one large one are lighted up. The attendants, headed by the master of the family, pledge the company win an old cider, which circulates freely on these occasions. A circle is formed round the large fire when a general shout and hallooing takes place, which we hear answered from all the adjacent villages and fields. Sometimes 50 or 60 of these fires may be all seen at once. This being finished, the company return home, where the good housewife and her maids are preparing a good supper. A large cake is always provided with a hole in the middle. After supper, the company all attend the bailiff, or head of the oxen, to the weighing house, where the following particulars are observed. The master, at the head of his friends, fills the cup, generally of strong ale, and stands opposite the first or finest of the oxen. He then pledges him in a curious toast. The company follow his example with all the other oxen, and addressing each other by his name. This being finished, the large cake is produced, and with much ceremony put on the horn of the first ox through the hole above mentioned. The ox is then tickled to make him toss his head. If he throws the cake behind, then it is the mistress's prerequisite. If before, in what is termed the boozy, the bailiff himself claims the prize. The company then return to the house, the doors of which they find locked, nor will they be opened till some joyous songs are sung. On their gaining admittance, a scene of mirth and jollity ensues, which lasts the greater part of the night. The custom is called in Herefordshire wassailing. The fires are designed to represent the Savior and his apostles, and it was customary, as to one of them, held as representing Judas Iscariot, to allow it to burn a while and then pull it out and kick about the materials. Yet again, another reading from the Book of Days on this, the 5th of January. Stay tuned for tomorrow. Bye-bye.